So good morning, and I want to welcome you all to MPHA's 2016-2017 webinar series. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Becca Bolas, and I am the Executive Director of the Maine Public Health Association. The goal of our webinar series is to feature and promote ongoing public health work in Maine, and that includes accomplishments, current events, programs, and different resources around our state. There's a lot of exciting work going on and very important public health issues that we need to address, and so the purpose of these webinars is to provide an opportunity and a forum to talk about those and to feature different ways that you can get involved in promoting public health in Maine. We are grateful to the Maine Area Health Education Center and the New England Public Health Training Center for their generous support of this educational opportunity, which is available to anyone who has an interest in public health in Maine. Today's webinar is going to be led by Lisa Pullman, who is the Executive Director of the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and today she will be talking about climate change and health, including NRCM's work in this area, as well as ways that you can get involved. If you do have questions while she's presenting or once she's done, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to use the chat feature. And where you find that is there should be a gray box on your screen through freeconferencecall.com, and there's a little thought bubble. If you click on that and then change who you're responding to be me, Becca Bolas, instead of everyone, then that way I can get your questions and help facilitate the discussion. The other thing I want to point out is if the box is preventing you from being able to see all of the slides, there is a gray vertical bar on the right side of the box that has a gray arrow that's pointing to the left. If you click on that, it'll shrink the size of the box. And if that doesn't make sense, then let me know and I can try to explain it differently. But then that way it'll shrink and you'll be able to see more of the presentation. So again, I want to welcome you all to this webinar. And if you have questions while Lisa's presenting, please let me know. And I will now turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Becca, and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you for a little while in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I am Lisa Pullman, and I've been involved with the Natural Resources Council of Maine for 16 years now, starting on the board of directors and eventually becoming the executive director 6 years ago now. In fact, I took over at exactly the same time that Paul LePage took over as governor, so it's been an invigorating journey so far. In my 35 years in advocacy organizations in Maine, I've worked on domestic violence, income security, and healthcare policy before I came to NRCM. So I have a broad base of experiences that I bring to my work. And it's great to be spending my days now looking out for the beautiful Maine environment, because that's what drew me to Maine in the first place. And it really is the basis of our health and quality of life and essential for our economy. So today I'm going to talk about climate change in Maine, both the warning signs and the winning solutions. But first, just a little bit more about NRCM so that you know what we're about. We've been around for close to 60 years. We were originally formed back in 1959 by a group of volunteer sportsmen and others who were concerned about the Allegash River in northern Maine, which was possibly going to be flooded and ruined by a proposed dam project. Those volunteer leaders changed hearts and minds around the state and eventually achieved a National Wild and Scenic River designation in 1970, which has protected the Allegash from development forever. NRCM went on to achieve many victories over these nearly 60 years, including the bottle bill, the billboard ban, getting rid of DDT spraying, stopping a nuclear reactor from being built in Trenton, and many, many successes that have changed the face of Maine for the better. I want to just quickly mention that we have 4 distinct areas of expertise and focus. One of them is our waters, where we work on removing dams to help with fishery restoration, keeping our waters safe from acid mine drainage, keeping our lake protection strong, and protecting our shoreland waters from runoff through setback requirements. And of course, all of these things could be a separate lecture and have public health impacts. We also work on forests and wildlife, including sustainable forestry harvesting, land conservation, helping to lead the Land for Maine's Future program, efforts at the State House, helped with the designation of the National Monument that just happened in August in northern Maine, and maintaining wilderness in the North Woods, such as preventing sprawling development. We work on climate and clean energy, which is the topic for today. We've actually been raising this issue of climate change for nearly 20 years in Maine. We were the first state in the union to create a climate action plan back in the mid-2000s, and we've been promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency ever since. Finally, we have a Sustainable Maine Communities program, which is focused on, for example, getting rid of products, dealing with products that have toxins, making companies that create them help to pay for the end of their life, such as thermostats and electronic waste. We've been promoting recycling versus landfill in statewide policy debates. And we've been involved with a lot of local groups as they implement ordinances to get rid of bags and styrofoam and pesticides. And lately we're working more on food waste recovery and actually have a bill coming up in the next session. So now, getting into the meat of today, I made a couple of assumptions that there are mostly climate change believers in this audience, and that also climate change is not completely new, and this information won't be completely new, but hopefully it bears some repeating. So you've probably seen charts like this that show the dangerous levels of carbon dioxide pollution that has been growing exponentially since the dawn of the industrial age, causing global warming with many disastrous effects. In fact, global warming is a serious concern for us here in Maine. Maine is warming faster than most states, and the Gulf of Maine is in fact warming faster than 99% of all other water bodies on the planet. And all of this has been accelerating substantially since 1970 and just getting faster and faster. This is a map that shows what summers in Maine will be like over the next several decades over two scenarios, orange and red. Many people have been to Washington, D.C., I'm sure, in the summer and know how hot it is. I can't quite imagine Maine getting that way, but it looks like we're on that kind of trajectory. And I was just remarking this morning that the snow, like we had yesterday, is starting to seem early, the fact that it's snowing on, December 5th, even though when I first moved to Maine 37 years ago, snowstorms happened even earlier and frost did too. So this is the kind of thing that we're seeing: later ice in, earlier ice out. Warmer winters are shortening the ice fishing and pond hockey seasons in addition to impacting these lake and river ecosystems. We're already seeing these changes on lakes and rivers in Maine. Ice cover duration has declined on Sebago Lake by 2 weeks over the past 2 decades, and Moosehead ice out dates became earlier by 9 days, and Damariscotta Lake ice out dates became earlier by 16 days. That was from 1850 to 2000, with most of this change occurring between 1875 and 1945, and then 1968 to 2000. More and more ice fishing derbies are canceled for safety reasons, and this really is just one example of an impact on our culture. Sea level rise, scientists and planners have known for more than a decade that the sea level is rising. In '95, the EPA estimated that a 2 to 3 foot sea level rise was possible over the next several generations. And climate change scientists have recently revised their predictions in response to a quicker than expected warming trend. Global warming has accelerated the melting of ice in Greenland, Antarctica, and the Arctic Circle. Glaciers worldwide have shrunk by more than 50%. Just a few weeks ago, we sponsored a presentation by a family that sailed through a section of the Northwest Passage to show the impact of melting ice. About a decade ago, NRCM used scientific evidence from the University of Maine's Climate Institute in Orono and others to show a 1 meter, 3 foot, and 6 meter, 20 foot sea level rise on coastal communities in Maine. So we're looking at the map that was created then of Portland. The NRCM analysis estimates that a 1 meter rise would submerge more than 20,000 acres of coastal real estate in Maine. The 6 meter rise would inundate more than 128,000 acres. And some of the results just around Portland, the 1 meter being in red and the 6 meter being in yellow, you'd have to redo huge sections of Route 1. Millions of dollars would be required to rebuild fresh water supplies and wastewater treatment plants, and the value of damaged and destroyed commercial and residential properties would be enormous. Now, I know this is a public health crowd, so here's some of the public health impacts that we're seeing and probably going to see more of. First and foremost, that has been a direct experience for me is Lyme disease. I had it for the first time, not last summer, but the summer before. And again, I remember when I first moved to Maine how relieved I was not to have to deal with ticks that used to be prevalent in the Midwest. But that has changed now, and I see them for a solid 6 months where I live in Jefferson. Lyme disease will likely become even more widespread in Maine because warmer winters allow deer ticks, those Lyme disease carriers, to spread north into Maine from areas to our south. The number of identified cases has risen dramatically in the last 10 years, still higher in the southern part of the state. And as you probably know, Lyme disease is a nasty, nasty disease creating serious fatigue and headache and joint stiffness that can persist throughout life. You may have also heard that winter ticks are decimating the Maine population, the Maine moose population, killing off young moose because of their excessive numbers. Some say that we may have no moose in Maine by 2050. Extreme heat events have caused excessive mortality in places like Chicago and Europe and New York and California, and we may not think of Maine as a location likely to experience heat-related morbidity and mortality, but we've not had a tracking system in place to look at it until very recently, so it's something that we should keep our eyes on. Now, we are at the end of the tailpipe for carbon emissions from coal and oil-fired power plants to our west. All that stuff comes down and hangs over the state of Maine, which is why Acadia National Park, which should be one of the most pristine places on the planet, has some of the worst air days. Warmer weather may mean more days with higher ozone levels, and high ozone levels are known to aggravate asthma. Maine has one of the highest rates of asthma in the U.S., and the Department of Environmental Protection issues air quality alerts based on forecasting with the intention of reducing asthma morbidity during periods of high ozone. Then there's algal blooms. So there are harmful algal blooms occur when colonies of algae, simple plants that live in the sea and the freshwater, grow out of control while producing toxic or harmful effects on people, fish, shellfish, marine mammals, and birds. There are human illnesses caused by these blooms. Though rare, they can be debilitating and even fatal. They've been reported in every U.S. coastal state, and their occurrence may be on the rise. They're a national concern because they affect not only the health of people and marine ecosystems, but the health of the local and regional economies. There is a Maine volunteer lake monitoring program, and it will soon be posting annual records of algae blooms in Maine. Up in our forests, Maine is one of the most forested states in the country, but these changes in temperature, later frosts, and warm winter weather are bringing more severe infestations of forest pests and disease that can survive in milder weather. For example, the Maine Forest Service tells us that the balsam woolly adelgid has traditionally only been a problem on the coast, and now we're seeing it farther inland, killing trees. These pests can kill fir trees and hemlocks, and both are in increase in Maine. And then there's our iconic brook trout. Speaking of the brook trout, they are also threatened by warming waters and flooding that leaves brooks and streams swollen and overflowing and later reduced to a hot trickle. The combination of too many impassable culverts, algal blooms, and nutrient runoff threaten one of the most unique components of our outdoor heritage. We are also working hard not to threaten them further with poorly regulated open-pit mineral mining. And of course, there are Gulf of Maine impacts because it is a quickly warming body. Our poor puffins are starving because warmer temperatures are signaling them to come back too early. And then when they get here, they're unable to find the traditional food in the sea that their babies eat. And so their babies are dying sometimes. Invasive species like green crabs are decimating our shellfish industries like mussels and clams. Just this morning on the news, there was a report about the shrimp industry continuing to be curtailed due to warming waters. And lobsters have been abundant in recent years due to loss of predators, but warming waters are driving them north. A study released this September by the University of Maine scientists has dropped the bomb that rising ocean temperatures are such a problem for baby lobsters that by the year 2100, you might say goodbye to lobster rolls if waters continue warming at the current rate. To put that in context, they note that the UN's climate change panel predicts the Gulf of Maine will be 5 degrees warmer in 2100, just 84 years from now, and lobster larvae can't thrive in waters that warm. And of course, there's the carbon pollution that's coming from those coal and oil-fired power plants to our west, but there's also mercury emissions. And infected adult loons have fewer chicks. Pregnant women have long been warned about eating fish from Maine's lakes. Ironically, our drought this summer meant that the lakes were cleaner because less rain fell, bringing down those toxins from the sky. But that's not really a win. So that's all the bad news. Now let's talk about what we're doing. We are working on reducing carbon pollution from power plants, boosting solar energy, keeping tar sands out of Maine, I'll talk about all of these, and increasing energy efficiency and weatherization. So let's start here with reducing carbon emissions from power plants, what was happening, what's been happening at the federal level, and what's been happening at the regional level. It's important to know that carbon pollution from power plants is the single largest source of U.S. global warming emissions, 30%. And Obama and his Environmental Protection Agency created this first major nationwide federal climate action to establish state-by-state targets for carbon emission reductions from power plants, offering a flexible framework for the states to meet those, but the overall intention was to reduce national electricity sector emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. This Clean Power Plan was really the basis when we went to Paris to work on the Paris Climate Accord. It was the basis of the United States taking action and being a leader globally. However, it passed in 2015, but in February of 2016, there were 24 states and utilities and other polluters who held it up in court, and the Supreme Court put a stay on the Clean Power Plan, basically saying that the EPA could not continue to implement it until it's dealt with in the courts. This September, oral arguments were heard in federal court. This is likely going to take a long time, plus the new Trump administration has basically said, or the President-elect Trump has said he's going to rip up the Clean Power Plan, and that for us is a shame and not the direction that we should be going. So all of this remains to be seen in the months ahead. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is what we've been doing really for almost a decade here in the Northeast to do the same thing, which is to reduce power plant emissions. And you'll see here that there are a number of states that came together to establish a regional cap on carbon dioxide emissions from the power sector, and they're requiring power plants to possess a tradable CO2 allowance for each ton of CO2 they emit. So that's essentially a cap and trade program. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, also referred to as RGGI, continues to lower the cap on the amount of CO2 that power plants can emit through the issuance of a limited number of tradable allowances. This approach allows market forces to determine the most economic means of reducing emissions and creates market certainty needed to drive long-term investments in clean energy. If this region were a country in terms of carbon pollution, it would be the 14th largest emitter in the world out of 200 nations, similar to the United Kingdom, Mexico, or Indonesia. So it's a big deal. Oops. The 9 states are now working to advance this effective program, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Next is talking about advancing solar energy. So the price of solar has been going down. That has led many people across the nation, businesses and residences, to install more solar. However, most states have solar incentivizing policies. Maine does not really, and therefore, while U.S. solar installations have been going up and prices have been going down, Maine is way behind even our New England neighbors because of the lack of solar policy. And as such, we're not only missing out on the carbon reduction benefits of this renewable energy source, but we're missing out on the jobs that could go with it. Vermont and Massachusetts have 5 times more solar jobs than Maine per capita, and we really just can't afford that. It's such a promising sector for rural Maine, and we know so many businesses that would like to be growing, but they're having to grow in Massachusetts and New Hampshire because they can't grow in Maine. There's just too much uncertainty. So I just wanted to say that we are working hard on comprehensive solar policy. Last session, we worked with a broad coalition, including the utilities, the ratepayer advocates, and we had a fabulous bill, and we got to the end of the session, and the governor vetoed it, which means that you have to get a 2/3 majority to override his veto. We went in for veto override day. We had the votes that we thought we needed, and unfortunately politics got in the way, and 2 supporters chose not to vote, which meant that we lost that by 2 votes. We're going to go back in. We're going to have another solar policy run. We've got the Solar Coalition already meeting. We're going to try it again. The legislature starts up again in January. But meanwhile, the Public Utilities Commission has also been attacking the only policy that we have that promotes solar, which is called net metering. And for any of you who may have solar or know somebody who does, this basically means that for every kilowatt hour that you produce more than you need on a particular day, you get a credit for that and can use it on a less sunny day at another time. They're wanting to do away with this. We had in our bill an opportunity to transform net metering in a way that would have been acceptable to the ratepayers, the residences, and the utilities, but we couldn't get that through, so we want to make sure that they don't just do away with net metering altogether with absolutely nothing to replace it. So that's what we'll be working on in the coming legislature, and more on how you can help in just a second. We are continuing to work on keeping tar sands out of Maine. For those of you who are not familiar, tar sands is a bitumen sort of substance currently being dug for, mined for up in the northern reaches of Alberta, Canada. And they are looking to find a way to the global market in all directions, which is why you're hearing about the Keystone Pipeline, while you're hearing about the Dakota Access Pipeline, which we just got news that has been stopped for the moment in search of a different route, not through Native American sacred grounds. So this is a big international issue and puts us at odds, unfortunately, with our Canadian neighbors. This shows you the pipeline that could potentially get from where the tar sands are being dug for currently and mined for, all the way to, you'll see Sarnia, and then you'll see Montreal, and yet that orange arrow represents a pipeline that currently exists that runs from South Portland to Montreal, has been there since post-World War II, and currently takes regular oil in from places like Venezuela and stuff on ships to send up to Montreal to be refined. But what ExxonMobil and the owners that are the owners of this pipeline, along with others, wanted to do was to reverse the flow so they could get tar sands out South Portland. Now the problem with this is that, first of all, you don't want oil to spill in your water bodies anyway, because that's a mess, as we know from Valdez and all of those kinds of oil spills. But this stuff actually sinks to the body and bottom of any water body. It's heavy, and on the evening of July 25th in 2010, there was a tar sands oil pipeline near the Kalamazoo River that ruptured, and millions of gallons of oil leaked into the river, enough to cover 27 football fields with 1-inch thick layer of oil, making it one of the most disastrous pipeline spills in U.S. history. And when the chemicals used to dilute start to evaporate and dissipate into the environment, the heavy tar sands bitumen returns to its more natural density, eventually sinking through the water. So the technology to clean up these spills effectively does not exist. It's costly, it's long-lasting, and it's just the kind of thing that we don't want to happen here in Maine. It could happen, though, because that pipeline goes right by, it goes along the Crooked River, it goes right by Sebago Lake, and obviously out South Portland. So South Portland got very engaged in creating a clear skies ordinance that was saying essentially, we don't want to build a tar sands export facility here on our port. It is not consistent with our comprehensive plan. And therefore, they were able to stop this reversal from happening for the moment. However, Exxon and the owners of the pipeline have sued the city of South Portland. That court case is pending. The city is fundraising like crazy to mount their legal defense. They have a legal firm helping them, but of course Exxon has got more money than God, and so this is going to be a long protracted case, and we're doing what we can to help support the city of South Portland. Obviously, we'll continue to hear about the pipelines as well. There's, the Trump administration, and Trump himself has said he's got, it's been shown that he has a stake, a financial stake in some of these pipelines being built. So these are things that we're going to have to watch. And lastly, we're working hard to increase energy efficiency and weatherization. And this brings me back to RGGI, because what we do when we put a cap on carbon emissions and then we make the power plants buy the tradable allowances, the money that is generated is used to fund our Efficiency Maine program and the efficiency opportunities that we've had that have saved businesses and residences millions of dollars over the last several years. So it is part of the plan to continue to reduce the cap. So if you reduce the cap on the number of allowances, that increases the price of them, and that increases the amount of money that we can use for efficiency. So we really have a win-win with RGGI. And it really is the model that is being held up for the whole country in terms of the ability to implement the Clean Power Plan as soon as we can get that out of the courts. We recently did a poll that showed that, many, many people support the notion of a 5% per year reduction in regional power plant carbon pollution. And that kind of a bill is going to be in the legislature coming up, and we need to make sure that happens. Actually, we have to do all these things. The climate threat is huge, and we need to work on efficiency and renewable energy and all of these things. We actually need to also work on electric vehicles, because the transportation sector is one of the other major drivers of carbon pollution. So we're doing some things where we're trying to increase the number of electric vehicle charging stations in the state. And in fact, this is one thing we agree with Governor LePage on, because he's working on a new corridor from Montreal down to the coast for those visitors that would have more electric vehicle charging stations along it. So bottom line is we need to work on all these fronts. So now we're getting closer to what can you do. Just know that we're in Augusta. I'm looking at the State House dome out my window right now. We're a block away. We have a team of 6 lobbyists who, when the session starts, they're there every day and until the dark of night, keeping track of what's happening, interacting with legislators, negotiating on various bills, and bringing citizens' voices forward. That is the winning combination, having our expertise, but also having citizens get involved, because legislators listen to their constituents. So we need people to write. We need people to come. We need people to call. We need people to write letters to the editor. All of those things help get across the fact that citizens of Maine want to protect the environment and are supportive of these various initiatives. Here's something that you could do right now. Senator Collins is going to be extremely important going forward. As a matter of fact, I have heard that she's the last Republican in the Senate who still believes that climate action is important. And we've been encouraging our members to give her a call right now. So take a minute and write down the nearest phone number for you or call the D.C. office. Make sure to say that you're her constituent from Maine. Thank her for her climate leadership in the past, including standing up for the Clean Power Plan and wind and solar power. Ask her to do everything she can to stand up to President-elect Trump if he tries to dismantle climate policies or to weaken the Environmental Protection Agency. Right now, this week, we're hoping that we don't hear that he's put a climate science denier at the head of the EPA, but it's not too late to call her and say she should intervene in that. And maybe you can use an anecdote from something you've heard in my talk about how we know climate change is already impacting Maine's economy and environment, and that Maine people like you overwhelmingly support climate action. So here's a couple of the folks that we're worried about. But we predict that many of Trump's proposals will fail or be dropped. So he was kind of saying all kinds of things during the campaign. He's retracted some of them already. Some of them he promised to do are extremely difficult, if not impossible to do, but that doesn't mean we don't need to be vigilant. Nothing in this campaign indicated that this was a mandate to roll back environmental laws. So the environmental community will be strong. We'll stand together and continue to fight for clean air and clean water. There will be some losses, and that's hard to take, but NRCM's been around a long time. We know how to pick ourselves up again and dust ourselves off and try for another day. Senators Collins and King will play key roles in the Senate. LePage, who has 2 years left in his last term, will rapidly become a lame duck, and we're seeing some signs of that already. That doesn't mean that he won't continue to try to move his agenda, whatever that is, but we've been incredibly successful in stopping most of his rollback attempts on the environment over the last 6 years of his term. And a lot is going to happen at the state level and even more importantly at the local level. And that brings me back to our Maine's Sustainable Communities Project, because a lot of local groups are focusing on what can we do in our town? Can we get a solar panel on the school roof? Can we do something about the efficiency of our municipal buildings? Could we have a solar community solar farm? All of these things are things that are happening at the local level. We're here to support those local efforts in any way that we can, and I think more is going to happen. I want you all to know this is the NRCM staff, and we are so up for the fight ahead. We're strong, we're incredibly knowledgeable and good at communications, good at member outreach, good at our roles as lobbyists at the State House, and good at getting back to people who ask us questions, so feel free to contact us. I also want to take just a minute to say that we have 16,000 members and activists across the state of Maine in every legislative district and across the country, but we also have a special initiative now to focus on the millennials amongst us, and we have 7 of them working on our staff right now. The 6 featured here are the ones who are working on our NRCM Rising initiative, and that has been about pulling together folks who are somewhere between 20 and 40, early 40s together to learn what the issues are, to network, and because we want to hear their voices. We're having separate, probably 6 or 8 events a year where folks get the opportunity to meet with their peers who are in the legislature, come to the State House, as well as have some fun outdoor activities, particularly where they can learn about how NRCM's been involved in protecting these places. So if any of you are in that age bracket, we'd love to have you get involved. It's always important to remember what we're protecting. Our staff, board, and members care deeply for the air, land, and water of Maine. I'm sure you do too. We are people who live across the state and enjoy nature in our backyards, at our summer camps, at state parks, and our national areas. We want to connect with more Maine people in the coming months. We're meeting with sportsmen, immigrants, and others So let us know if there's a group you'd like us to meet with so we can share priorities and ideas. We'd love for you to join us, get on our Action Alert Network, become a member. That's it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Lisa. That was great. I actually have some questions. So just to remind everybody else who's on the webinar, if you do have a question, there is a chat box in your conference call dashboard, and if you click on that and choose the recipient to be me, Becca Bolas, then I can relay your question and help facilitate this. But while that's happening, I do have two questions for you. And actually one more of a statement, I guess. So on your website, if I remember right, there's also resources for people who are interested in working on local ordinances. So maybe the bag fee, the plastic bag fee, things like that. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. So if you go to our website, you'll see that there is Sustainable Maine is one of your options, and if you click on that, you'll find model ordinances. You'll find some information, I think, on which towns have already passed, for example, bag fee ordinances. And Sarah Lakeman is our project director in that area, and you'll find her on the staff list. So yes, there's lots of information. We also are going to start a special, sort of email group that Sarah communicates with, like sends quarterly updates out about what's been happening at the local front, and people might be interested in joining that when that time comes.
Yeah, that's great. What is so helpful is knowing that there are multiple ways and at different levels of engagement that people can work to influence environmental policy. So whether it's joining the Action Network or actually trying to influence policy in their local town, I think is really, really great. The question I have for you, and it's sort of two parts, is around the tar sands. So I'm wondering if you can talk about whether there's been pushback in other, I noticed on the map you showed there were dots in the other communities. Has there been pushback in those communities, and is there any sort of a coalition amongst those communities? And then that's the first part of my question. And the second is, what can people do if they live in Maine, whether they're in South Portland or in the Sebago Lake area or elsewhere?
So back when this was really first coming to the fore, and so I'm probably talking about 2 to 3 years ago now, we actually met with people in small towns all along the Crooked River, because that's where the pipeline comes through Maine. And a number of those towns, like Norway, for example, and Harrison, actually passed local ordinances that were mostly symbolic, but they basically said, we don't want tar sands oil coming through our communities. We don't want the spill in the Crooked River. We don't want that threat anywhere near us. We don't believe in tar sands, that kind of thing. So, once South Portland passed its ordinance, though, it kind of cut it down cold. But as I said, that case is now in court, and just to say that we keep in touch with those Western Maine communities that were along the Crooked River and such, but there's not an active coalition right at the moment. But as this case gets closer to hearing arguments in court or things like that, I imagine that we will re-engage with some of those people. It's a little tricky because ultimately, we can't violate the Commerce Clause. You can't tell another state that they can't do commerce with your state. But that's why, the fundamental decision here was that South Portland did not want to transform their port to use it in this way. And that's really the issue that's at hand. There's a whole international Canadian and U.S. Coalition of people who are paying attention to tar sands, who are involved in the fights about the pipelines going down to the Gulf of Mexico, such as Keystone, North Dakota Access. the Native the Native Canadians in British Columbia stood up and said, no, we don't want a pipeline through our lands. So it is the case that Alberta and the Canadian government behind it has been having a hard time figuring out how to get this oil to market. We, of course, wish they would just leave it in the ground. And I'm sure if folks have not seen pictures of what it's doing to northern Alberta in the middle of the boreal forest and all of the impacts that it's having, you should Google it and look at some pictures. It's just awful. So this is not a direction that we should be going, and we can mobilize people quickly when there's an action to be taken. Right at the moment, the action that we're taking is trying to support the city of Portland to get enough money together to continue to advance their defense.
That's great. Thank you. I don't see any questions coming in, so I think you did a really great job covering a very wide scope of topics and the various climate issues that Maine is facing, but also around the world. And I know that I think Tyler may still be on to talk about an opportunity that NRCM and the American Lung Association are both a part of. So I'll let Tyler talk for just a minute about that.
Great, thanks, Becca. Hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me talk at you for just a few minutes. I'll keep this pretty quick. So my name is Tyler St. Clair. I am the Healthy Air Campaign Coordinator for the American Lung Association here in Maine. We focus nationally on air quality issues and how that impacts public health, and more often than not, that circles around to climate change and how climate change is affecting public health. So a lot of what Lisa was just talking about, we approach it from a slightly different perspective, but typically come to the very same conclusions, that something has to be done to address climate change. So I also manage what is called the Healthy Air Coalition. We're a group of about 50 health-focused organizations from around the state. These range anywhere from Healthy Maine partnerships to groups like the Maine Public Health Association or Physicians for Social Responsibility is another example. And so we have a lot of different health perspectives, all with their own unique focuses, but all coming together to work on public health as a general issue. We also do a lot of work on an individual level with people, physicians who focus on allergy and immunology, to those who live with lung disease, asthma, COPD, many other respiratory diseases. So we definitely try and cover the entire range of perspectives that people have coming to this idea of public health and how air quality affects it. And in a state like Maine, and Lisa touched on this a little bit, but in a state like Maine, it's incredibly important. I'm originally from southern Indiana, where a lot of this air pollution that Maine has now is coming from. And Maine is disproportionately affected, being such a small state, but having one of the oldest average populations and having one of the highest rates of asthma nationally. According to our State of the Air report that we release every year, over 140,000 people in Maine live with asthma. And so that's a huge issue, especially when certain counties in Maine to the south and on the coast receive the brunt of this air pollution, are affected much more than central and northern Maine. So a couple of the issues that we work on, the Clean Air Act is kind of the cornerstone to all the work that we do. The health-based standard for air pollution, how that impacts our families and our communities. And more often than not, in this past year we saw quite a few riders or bills that kind of aimed to weaken the Clean Air Act and the health-based standard that it represents. And so we are definitely gearing up for a tougher battle with the new administration coming in, with cabinet picks that are not necessarily as enthusiastic about our positions as we are. We also are working on the EPA's new methane rules that they passed a couple months ago on existing sources. And once again, a lot of these things are being targeted in legislative riders and amendments to roll them back to weaken the EPA's ability to monitor air quality and how that affects public health. And so these are really important issues that we have to focus on all the time, playing defense to make sure that they're not stripped away, because there's much more we can do. Obviously, national ambient air quality standards are another big one. The new 2015 standards, raise the bar for what we determine as healthy air. And, there really is there's no bar high enough, especially if you talk to somebody with asthma. The best air quality is air quality with no pollution. And so we want to keep, enforcing these air quality standards and strengthening them whenever we have the ability to ensure that we're protecting public health. Because, science has shown since the Clean Air Act was enacted, and we keep, pushing forward these new air regulations and these new rules to make sure that we're reducing our emissions, that, we're saving lives, we're preventing asthma attacks. That's less trips to the emergency room every year. And, that it has a huge health impact, but also it has an economic impact. It's less missed days of work, less missed days of school for kids. So these are very important issues, and especially moving forward into this new administration. Like I said, these are things that absolutely need to be focused on. Something currently that we're working on, Lisa also touched on this, is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's essentially a regional clean power plant, and it's shown to be monumentally effective. And we have a very unique and very powerful opportunity in this next legislative session to make sure that, we're moving forward post-2020 and advancing, the ability of what RGGI can accomplish, because it's already done so much, but by reducing that carbon cap, we can definitely make even more progress than we've seen already. Which is, just great for Maine's future. And so, how do we engage with our partners and with health professionals, and how do we engage with our delegations? We focus mainly on a federal level. Every so often we'll work on state bills, but by and large it tends to be federal with our DC delegations. We do a lot of call-ins to offices with health professionals, those living with lung disease. Health partners will call in, and on a call that we hosted recently, we had Shelley Pingree's chief of staff join us, and he made the comment that it is monumentally important that people get involved and that they communicate with their offices, because they do care and they do want to hear the opinions of the people back home, to make sure that they're doing the right thing for their communities back in Maine. And so that's a really powerful way that we communicate and advocate for the issues that are important to us. We also do sign-on letters. Just recently, we had an organizational sign-on letter opposing policy writers for the funding mechanism during this lame duck session of Congress to keep the federal government running. And so we had a number of partners sign on to that, and that's also always well received to show that the wider health community is watching on these issues and cares about these issues and know that they're important. And finally, we do media outreach with letters to the editor, op-eds, trying to control the narrative around, what climate change means, how it impacts public health, and how important it is to people here at home that this is addressed. And so, we're always looking for new individuals, new groups to, work with the Healthy Air Coalition. We are starting to kind of expand our scope a little bit, and especially going to 2017, like Lisa had mentioned, it is monumentally important that we kind of gear up for the fight ahead. So, if someone is interested with working with us, we definitely encourage you to reach out to us. We are always looking for new advocates and new storytellers and people who are ready to kind of join the fight and make sure that we're protecting the quality and the health of our communities. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. If not, that's all I have, Becca.
All right, great. Thank you, Tyler, for sharing all that information. I would say that anyone who's on the call that is interested in getting in touch with Tyler, probably I would say email me, and I'm happy to connect you. I don't have a slide here that has your contact information on it, but I just want to thank Lisa again and NRCM for taking the time this afternoon to talk with us and share the latest science with climate change, as well as what's going on at home, and then what we can do as individuals and as organizations to combat this major public health issue. I'll also add that climate change and health is the thematic, I should say, public health priority of the American Public Health Association over this next year. So there's going to be a lot more going on in terms of what MPHA is also working on. And I also want to echo what Tyler was just saying and what Lisa presented about contacting your representative. I was at an event last week that NRCM hosted at Frontier, and we heard from legislators that they like to hear directly from their constituents, either a phone call or a letter with issues that you're concerned about. And so just another way to encourage you to do that. I think sometimes it can be easy to feel like you're pestering them, but they actually do want to hear from you. So thank you all again for joining today. I want to let you know that our next webinar will be in early January, Wednesday the 11th. The Maine Alliance for Addiction Recovery will be presenting about an app that they designed. It's an addiction resources app that has resources all around the state, including treatment centers, but everything, including to food banks and schools and other resources for community members. So if you'd like to register for that webinar, you can go to our website to do that, and I hope you're able to join us. So thank you very much. And that is it.